Sharm el-Sheikh, the city where wars were ended and treaties were formed, once again carries the hopes of millions. As world leaders gather under Egypt's banner for the Sharm el-Sheikh Summit for Peace, a quiet but powerful struggle unfolds behind the scenes. The battle over names on a list, men whose freedom could redefine the Palestinian political future. Hamas has demanded the release of 7 senior Palestinian leaders, including Marwan Barghouti and Ahmed Sadat, as part of the ceasefire deal brokered by Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and the United States. Israel, meanwhile, has linked every release to the confirmed handover of its 20 surviving captives in Gaza. It is a moment suspended between justice and diplomacy, between the memory of decades in prisons and the fragile promise of peace that now echoes through Egypt's Red Sea horizon.
لازم أسجل بتقدير واحترام شديد للرئيس الأمريكي ترامب على إرادته الحقيقية في إنهاء الحرب خلال جولة المفاوضات الحالية.
Negotiations remain intense behind the summit's closed doors. Hamas insists on including 7 senior Palestinian leaders, among them Marwan Barghouti and Ahmed Sadat, in the prisoners exchange list. Israel has agreed to release nearly 2,000 Palestinians, but only after the verified return of the 20 surviving Israeli captives. The unprecedented swap, the largest since 2011, could define the success or failure of Trump's 20-point plan and Egypt's 2-year mediation efforts that brought the guns to silence. As Egypt and the United States oversee the implementation, the world watches for signs of trust in a region scarred by its absence. To deeply understand the political and human implications of this exchange, we are joined by His Excellency Ambassador Hisham Youssef, Senior Advisor at the European Institute of Peace and one of the Arab world's most experienced diplomats in conflict resolutions and regional dialogue. Your Excellency, Ambassador Youssef, this deal hinges on a single moral and political question. Who deserves freedom first? How central is the prisoner issue to the durability of this new ceasefire?
Of course, this is an important issue. These prisoners have been in prison for many years, some of them even without a trial, some of them without proper accusations. Many Palestinians feel that this may be one of the last possible chances for getting the release of a number of important leaders that may have an impact on the political scene on the Palestinian front. So it is crucial for Palestinians to try to see how they can release as many prisoners as they possibly can.
We're speaking about Hamas' insistence on releasing senior leaders like Marwan Barghouti and Ahmed Sadat. This has reignited debate inside and outside Palestine. Do you see this as a genuine national demand or a strategic bargaining card from your point of view?
From the Palestinian side, it is not a bargaining chip. It's a demand to release the prisoners. But from the Israeli point of view, it is a bargaining chip. And it is also a question that is controversial within the Israeli coalition. I'm sure that you know that one of the extreme ministers in Israel visited Barghouti in prison to humiliate him. So yes, it becomes a public issue for them to make, to release someone like Marwan Barghouti, fearing that he may be influencing the Palestinian scene in a manner that may be detrimental to Israeli interests.
Exactly. The man you spoke about was Marwan Barghouti, and of course, the reports were revealed. This particular name carries enormous weight among Palestinians. So, if he was to be freed, could his presence unify the fractured Palestinian political scene, or do you think would it unsettle existing power structures in Ramallah? What do you think?
Well, power structures must change on the Palestinian front. And the division between the Palestinian factions, particularly Fatah and Hamas, has to end because it has been detrimental to Palestinian interests for since 2007. So, and I think this is recognized now by millions of Palestinians. Now Egypt is trying to reignite its efforts and try to see how reconciliation can be achieved and how a position can be agreed between the different factions. And I think that now they realize how important this may be at this point in time. So we will see how this will take place. But at the end of the day, of course, the time is not ripe for elections at this point in time. But at the end of the day, Palestinians will have to go to elections. And President Abbas has promised that this would happen within 1 year. Perhaps even 1 year is too optimistic, but I think that elections are necessary. And when President Abbas signed a decree in 2022, much as I recall, demanding that elections take place, the environment in both West Bank and Gaza changed, and there were all kinds of, 94% of those eligible to vote registered their vote, and so on. So I think there is a need to change the scene on the Palestinian front. It will not depend on one person, even if it is Marwan Barghouti. Marwan Barghouti is important and is a symbol and can contribute to the process, but I think effort is needed from Palestinians of all walks of life, whether they are Fatah, Hamas, or from other factions, or even independents. They have to work together in order to achieve some form of reconciliation and understanding of where the Palestinian national movement should go in order to deal with the current challenges. The challenges they are facing now after the current war in Gaza is really unprecedented, and they need to get their act together, and they have to see how this can be achieved in a constructive way without going into further divisions.
Indeed, indeed. And reconciliation was one of the demands for the Palestinian future, definitely, and was one priority that Egypt has been working on. Let me take you to other area where Israel's Shin Bet has objected to releasing 25 senior figures, labeling them ongoing threats. From a mediator perspective, how do you navigate the clash between security fears and political reconciliation?
Well, we have to admit that the Israeli security apparatus has a difficulty and a challenge because in the Shalit deal before, they released a Palestinian who became the leader of what happened on the 7th of October. So as far as they are concerned, they have all kinds of doubts, and they became much more difficult and inflexible in relation to the release of people that they think may become another threat in a few years' time. So they want to make sure that what happened with Yahya Sinwar will not happen again. So there is a level of fear on the Israeli front that is difficult to address with the Israeli public, and we will see how this would be navigated. But mediators are working very hard to ensure in order to see how this gap can be reconciled between Israelis and Palestinians in the current negotiations.
Well, actually, Your Excellency, you pinpointed your finger on a very important issue, which is trust and fear, and the gap between the two sides in building a kind of confidence and narrow the gap of this fear from both sides. But the question is, who should be afraid of who exactly, and how to negotiate or to bridge that gap during the negotiations?
Well, it is very clear who should be afraid of who, because you can see that 90% of Gaza has been totally destroyed. So Israel, the occupying power that has a huge military force, is the one that is feared by Palestinians. Of course, there are security concerns on the Israeli side, but they cannot be compared by what took place in Gaza and what is happening every single day in the West Bank as well, whether it's house demolitions, settler violence, or otherwise. So this is also the role of the mediators. And sadly, there is a very important role to be played by the United States, but unfortunately, the United States, as a result of a number of developments that took place in the last weeks, uh, contributed maybe to widening the gap of confidence because it accepted changes in the plan that was presented by the president to a number of Arab and Islamic countries because they were demanded by Netanyahu. So this also made the challenge even bigger, and the uh, lack of confidence became also a challenge to the whole process. So I hope that the summit that will take place tomorrow will address this issue and to see how this will not be repeated again in order to ensure that what is agreed with the American administration that is critical for the advancement of the whole process is maintained. And this will require a lot of work from the American administration and will require also cooperation from the Israeli side. My fear is that Israel may not be that forthcoming in relation to flexibility that is necessary for this to be achieved.
That's, of course, remains to be seen. Egypt has been the anchor of these negotiations for over 2 years now. We're speaking about the latest crisis here. How has Cairo managed to maintain credibility with both sides? And I mean here the Palestinian and the Israeli one, while also leading the global humanitarian efforts for Gaza?
Well, this is the destiny of Egypt. It has no choice but to try to see how it can balance the trust between the two parties. And of course, on the Palestinian side, this is much easier because the Palestinians know that the Egyptian position is supportive of the Palestinian cause and is supportive of the establishment of the two-state solution and having self-determination for the Palestinian people. And this has been the position of Egypt for decades. So this has not changed. In relation to Israel, of course, the relations between Egypt and Israel now are probably at their worst since the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty has been signed. But still, Israel understands that the weight of Egypt is crucial. And of course, Egypt, despite its weight and its role and its relations with both sides, also requires some assistance. And this is why there is an important and crucial role also that is being played by Qatar, and more recently, an important role that is also played by Turkey to help this process advance forward. So it is collaborative work, and this collaborative work is necessary in order for the situation to advance further.
If I may return back to the Palestinian issue and from the negotiations themselves. Now, the release of 250 lifers and 1,700 detainees could reshape the Palestinian society overnight. What kind of reintegration challenges and political symbolism will this mass return create within Gaza and the West Bank?
Well, I'm not sure that any of them will be going to the West Bank anytime soon, but I think it will change the dynamics on the Palestinian front. And this is not the first time. Also, when there was an exchange of prisoners in relation to, the earlier exchanges during the war, and before that, during the prisoner Shalit's exchange, there were also at the time around 1,100 plus prisoners that were released. So this is something that has taken place before. But of course, at the same time, we have to indicate that the situation today, as a result of the war for 2 years, leading to all the devastation that we see day in and day out on different screens around the world, has made the challenge much, much bigger. So the burden on those who are going to be released and the burden of those who are part of are crucial on the Palestinian scene, we'll have to see how to work together. And this is what we mentioned earlier about the effort that would be led by Egypt in relation to trying to unify the positions of the different Palestinian factions in order to advance the process and for them to have a solid position that would be able to confront the pressures that will be coming both from the US and from Israel, of course. And this would not be easy without a unified Palestinian position.
Of course, the list includes many names. Some of them had the life sentence, but many of them also were detained and were taken after the October 7th, 2023. During what rights groups have already called mass punitive arrests. Now, how can any peace process move forward, or how do you think those negotiations should be addressing those violations and the trauma that imprisonments represented for them?
Well, there has to be compensation and there has to be accountability. There are crimes against humanity that were committed by Israel. And this was recognized by all kinds of organizations, including Israeli organizations, including the United Nations. And the whole world is awaiting the verdict coming out of the International Court of Justice in relation to the court case that was presented by South Africa regarding genocide. So all this is part of the process of addressing grievances of Palestinians and possible war crimes, and this is part and parcel of the way of addressing the grievances that were faced by Palestinians throughout the years. And I believe that it is important for this issue to be one of the main areas of addressing the negotiating strategy for different countries addressing the situation. And I'm sure that there are all kinds of civil society organizations in the world that would be supporting this effort. And this was the case also in the last few months by dealing with all kinds of issues pertaining to the war and the atrocities that took place that are considered violations of international law and international humanitarian law. This applies to all kinds of aspects, including what happened in the humanitarian front and what happened by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and the people who were killed because they were going to get some humanitarian assistance. So there is a long list of atrocities that would need to be addressed in order for justice to be to prevail in this conflict.
Right. Israel reportedly has transferred prisoners to the Qnews and the offer for release, yet continues to raid homes in the West Bank, warning families against celebration. What does this reveal about Israel's intentions or mindset into a supposed to be a peace phase of negotiation?
Well, this is a very interesting question because it reflects the dichotomy in Israel, being a very strong military power, but then putting all kinds of pressures on all kinds of families in Gaza and the West Bank not to celebrate people who are being released. It is an interesting issue that needs to be addressed and so on. But at the same time, I think this is not the point. The point is not to make a big fuss out of the celebration. I think the important thing is for the Palestinians to act together and unify in addressing the challenge that they're going to face. The challenges that they are facing now are really unprecedented and will have a huge impact on the future of the Palestinian cause for many years to come. So the question, of course, they will have to celebrate within their families, within their communities, and so on. But Israel, becomes extremely intimidated by these celebrations and these shows of support and solidarity with those who have been in prison, because they know that almost all these prisoners have been in prison for many years without any justification because of all kinds of, accusations back and forth. And so we will have to see how this issue will be dealt with. But I hope that it doesn't result in implications or repercussions that will have a negative effect on Palestinian families either in the West Bank or in Gaza.
Now, internationally, this exchange is being framed as the first test of President Trump's 20-point plan. In your assessment, is this a genuine peace framework, or a temporary truce designed to ease political pressure on all sides? What is it exactly?
Well, it is a framework. You can call it a framework. You can call it principles. And the main focus was on the first stage. Now, there are many questions and many holes in relation to all kinds of aspects in the plan. So, just to give you one example or more, the stabilization force. What will be the mandate of the force? Will this be a force that comes out as a result of a UN Security Council resolution, or what kind of methodology will it allow this force to be established? Taking into consideration that one of the most sensitive issues for any government on earth is to send troops outside its borders. There are many countries that even have laws to prevent that. So sending troops is a very sensitive issue. Now, what are the assurances in relation to these forces? And what is their mandate? Is their mandate to, as Israel wants, to dismantle the military force or capabilities of Hamas, or to protect the civilians on the Palestinian front, or partially protecting, preventing attacks on Israel, but also protecting Palestinian civilians? And how will this take place? And what kind of assurances can be given to their security? Imagine a country that has troops in Gaza that then become attacked by Israel because it got, intelligence information, as they usually claim, that there is a Hamas operative in one place or another, and then they attack these places, and then a number of personnel from an army from whatever country in the world are killed. So what happens then? So there are all kinds of questions. Okay, issues of early recovery. Israel has not abided by its commitments in when we had a ceasefire in January. Humanitarian assistance wasn't coming in. And this created starvation. Okay, will Israel abide by its commitment this time around? We will have to wait and see. And then reconstruction. Will Israel allow reconstruction materials to go in and to allow hospitals to be repaired, allow schools to be repaired, and so on, homes, mobile homes, and so on? So we have a very long road ahead of us. I hope that one of the outcomes of the summit that will take place tomorrow is to give momentum to the following stages that will require a lot of heavy lifting by the whole international community. And it will be a tall order that I hope the international community will be willing to take responsibility for and deal with in a constructive way to help Palestinians that have been suffering for many, many years, and in particular the last few years. And this applies both to the West Bank and in Gaza.
Indeed. But that also depends, Your Excellency, on the will of the international community and of the United States and all parties to reach such end result.
We have seen the international community putting pressure to bear on Israel, and there are a number of European countries who have taken measures against Israel, indicating that what Israel is doing is unacceptable. So there is momentum. I hope that this momentum is not lost when, as the ceasefire continues and the situation changes, and then, of course, countries go to other places where they have other priorities and other concerns.
And that makes me ask you, now, France President Macron, the UK President, the EU leadership, and many of the foreign from the West, the Middle East, Asia, Europe, and everybody are attending the summit tomorrow. That is kind of signaling Europe's and the international community to renew involvement. Could that inclusion of major European powers shift the balance towards a more rights-based approach in negotiations, or give it a kind of more strength? What do you think?
Well, this would be my hope, but I have my doubts because the United States, sadly, is basing its plan on a framework that does not rely on international law. And this is one of the biggest challenges that I see in the plan itself. So the plan is based on a framework that addresses the situation from a perspective of de-radicalization. And it is not clear whether they mean de-radicalization only on the Palestinian side or also, even more importantly, on the Israeli side, because we have extremists on the Israeli side that have been sanctioned by all kinds of countries around the world. So I think that the question of extremism needs to be addressed, on both sides equally. And as a matter of fact, on the Israeli side, at least the Israeli side is a country. The Palestinians are not yet have not yet established their country, and there are all kinds of political forces and armed forces and so on. But a country has to be respectful of international law. Of course, the other side also has to be respectful, but then countries have more obligations in relation to how they deal with all kinds of issues. And Israel, as far as I am concerned, in this particular aspect, is rather lacking.
Right. Finally, Your Excellency, and briefly, if we can, for the thousands of Palestinian families waiting tonight, some for decades, what does this exchange truly represent? Is it a closure, a political victory, or merely the first fragile breath after years of suffocation?
Well, to be very brief, this is a very small breath in a very long history of all kinds of difficulties, atrocities, and suffering. So we hope that this would ease the suffering somewhat, but there is a long way to go. You know that the vast majority of Palestinians in Gaza now do not have a home to go to. So, and they not have food on the table, they don't have water and so on. So I hope that this would be the beginning of addressing some of these needs and concerns and deal with it in a more constructive way.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Ambassador Hisham Youssef, for sharing your valuable insights on this defining chapter of diplomacy. And as dawn breaks over Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt once again stands as the conscience of the region, where the language of peace is written not only in signatures and speeches, but in the long-awaited freedom of those who refused to surrender to their hope. I guess that brings us to the end of our episode or our coverage for now. Many thanks for watching.